Does this make me look like a wimp, or does it make me seem brave?
Okay, Florence!
I have driven a ton of cars throughout my career, but one of the biggest questions that I ever have gotten is, which one scared you the most? And that can be a really broad term, right? It could be everything from what was scary fast, or what was mechanically just not right, or any factor, really. So I really had to sit down and think about this, and I narrowed it down to not that many, surprisingly. Once you've driven a lot of cars and you've gotten the training for it, especially with racing schools and drifting schools and all that kind of good stuff, it can kind of get to the point where you're like, I kind of need something to scare me. But being numb as a car journalist or performance car journalist, I guess you could call me in some way, sometimes you really need that kick in the butt. So this is gonna be kind of a look back on memory lane. If you're new here, welcome. I'm David, driven a ton of cars, and I'm gonna talk about them. So make sure to slap that like button and let's get going. All right, we're getting this one out of the way. Jasmine and Black Barney. So Jasmine was the very first fast, scary car I ever drove. This was owned by my buddy James Kuhn at the time, who was out on deployment most of the time I knew him when living in Virginia Beach. So we would talk over Facebook, and he was bored in the desert somewhere or in the mountains somewhere, if you catch my drift, and he would just order car parts because he was bored. So he would order all these parts to make his Evo dumb fast. And Jasmine was this Evo that seemed like very far out of reach. It was like a local living legend. I had seen it in the garage, but I had never seen it driven because it was like this dormant monster. Now, the day finally came, he said, hey man, we have one chance before anything goes wrong because Evo, high horsepower, it's unpredictable. So that day was 14 degrees outside with snow on the ground, sometimes black ice, and a road that might as well be this thin. I was naive. I was 23 at the time, and I didn't realize how dangerous this was going to be. A lot of you guys know the story, but if you're new here, here's how it went. The car made over 40 pounds of boost with no boost by gear. We'll roll on in second gear, and that's a little bit of ice. Don't go across that, and go! Wow. Wow. Which means all of that power was going straight to the ground with no control, really. With an all-wheel drive car, having all four wheels spinning, you do a crab walk. And the fastest car before this one was only 500 horsepower, which was still very fast. To me, this was a crazy milestone. And that was awesome. So thankfully, the video's a big hit, everything's great, and then my friend Chris Durr had a very similar Evo, but with the right wheel and tire setup on it that could really get the full experience of what the car was like when the power was put down. And so I always compare Black Barney and Jasmine because Jasmine was like the wild card, right? You had no idea what was gonna happen. And then Black Barney with slicks all the way around would hook up so violently. Jasmine was scary because I needed to learn the car control to keep it straight on the road, and then Black Barney was scary just because it was that fast. Black Barney made 1,012 wheel horsepower to all four wheels. Freaking nuts. But then Jasmine later had a similar setup to Black Barney to where there was boost by gear, and I adapted to it. So yeah, crazy fast Evos. Next is the Dodge Omni GLH. Man, I was so excited to drive this one, and I couldn't be more thankful. They trailered the car all the way to me, and basically the number one thing about the Omni GLH that I drove, that it had over 400 horsepower in literally a soda can. It was a tiny car, super light, really interesting power band, but the scariest part was the lack of control. I couldn't really figure out how to keep this thing in a straight line. Footage that you've seen in this video so far of it, that was not me steering it this way. That was the wheel basically straight, and it would just have a mind of its own. That was weird. I'm sorry. It was such an interesting car to drive because a lot of people didn't really know about it. Shelby worked on it, which also explains why it was so crazy, and it made a ton of power. But it had this big bus-like steering wheel that I was just manhandling the entire review. What a time. I'm so glad I walked away from that one. But if you really want to talk about a car that I was very thankful to walk away from, it was Adam LZ's Barra Mustang. So Adam's GT350, which unfortunately the Voodoo engine had some problems, caught on fire, they pulled it out, and then they put a Barra in there, which it's one of my favorite engines that the United States never got. I've always wanted to drive one, and that is an important part of this story. So I went down to visit Adam. Adam was insanely generous and let me drive a whole bunch of his cars that weekend. Last but not least, was the GT350 with this engine in it. And I had never driven one, and I wanted to drive this car so bad. And he kept telling me, David, it's scary. Like, it's legitimately scary. And I was like, I got it, I can handle it. Thankfully, I could handle it, but I didn't think it was gonna be this rough. Oh my God. Zero traction, and the entire front end went back and forth. Adam also claimed that it pretty much wasn't finished and that it would basically be an R&D session driving it. They still had some suspension things to work out, wheel and tire setup things to work out, but I was in Florida. Stupid. Don't be like me. It had a sequential gearbox in it. They still were working with that. And every time you get on it, it would have a rev hang. So it would add and squeeze throttle, it would go, and then when I was done going, I would lift off the gas pedal and it would still keep accelerating for about a second or two. So anytime I needed to slow down, I would have to account for the rev hang after the shift. Ah! God dang it, bro! So scary! Also, it was just intimidating because it had 900 horsepower, 900 foot-pounds of torque, and the slicks would hook up, but then the really sticky tires up front would hook up. So I had this battle of hopping lanes with a very loose front end with no sway bar. It was a very scary car. That was one of the few cars in my recent history I walked out of and I was like, thank goodness I have so much seat time in crazy cars. Otherwise, I don't think I would have made it back. I know that sounds very dramatic because I committed myself to hitting red line because in the video, I felt very obligated and it could have been bad. is scary for a different reason, but this one is short and sweet. The Porsche 918. It is the most expensive car I've ever driven. So the scariness or intimidation factor was more so not because of the car's performance, but because of the car's price. And I lost sleep over it. I knew that I was gonna drive the 918 the next morning, and I was so stressed. I got up, I got in the car, we drove it in EV mode first, so it was like driving the most expensive golf cart of all time. Full electric. It's so weird. It's like driving an expensive golf cart. Remember, this is the early days of sports cars having hybrid systems. It was a very unique experience, and it's still the only one of the big three or the holy trinity of the LaFerrari P1 that I've driven to this day. But driving it was incredible. I had 40 minutes basically all to myself to have the drive of a lifetime. And I just kept getting faster and faster. And what was really funny is in the comment section below, people were like, you didn't drive it hard enough. Bro, trust me, I did. It's just the car was so smooth on camera and so well engineered, you couldn't tell that I was revving to like 9,000 RPM. It was just butter every time you got on it. Next is Javier's 8-second 240 SX, which then eventually ran 790s with a full interior and no roll cage. Crazy, but he ended up selling this car, but this car was a huge moment for me because I drove Javier Supra earlier in the day. It was my first 1,000 horsepower car I ever drove, and it was a huge moment because it was the first Supra I drove. So, big day, and then he let me go in the 8-second 240 and said, listen, you're allowed to go half to 3/4 throttle. I don't think you're ready yet. And I said, okay, Javier, it is your baby. I will not let anything happen to it. How do you not do like that all day? But even riding in this thing really showed me the difference between a quick car and a fast car. Like, the meaning of fast changed that day for me. Ready? Yep. Even when I did like 3/4 throttle, myself and James, who owned Jasmine at the time, the Evo we talked about earlier, we just had flabbergasted looks on our faces. But yeah, what an amazing time in that thing. It wasn't that it was scary mechanically, it was just dumb fast. And I'd say last but not least is the Rat Rod that I drove last year, which unfortunately, nobody knew what it was, so viewership was not so great.
Is that a booster seat for him?
It sure is.
Well, he got in yesterday and he told me, he's like, I'm gonna have to stretch for this one.
Behind the scenes booster seat over here.
This was one of those cars that if you didn't have a lot of seat time, very much like the Shelby we talked about earlier, you would hurt yourself. This thing made over 1,000 horsepower. It weighed literally nothing, and it had a drag transmission in it. Crazy, crazy fast, and you could see everything in front of you, and then it started raining. So not only am I driving this thing slightly drizzling in the rain, It just was an absolute riot to drive. And during the video, you could barely hear me talk. And it was just the ride of a lifetime. I had fun, but it definitely would have been scary for 99% of the population to ride shotgun in that thing. Now, in conclusion, I have driven a ton of stuff in this life, and I'm sure I'm missing some. For you, what was the scariest car you have ever experienced? Put it down in the comment section below. It's funny, the twin turbo Lambos and stuff are really fast, but they're not that scary. Same with the fast GTRs. They're just so buttery smooth. I was gonna say those in this video, but I just had a ton of fun in those things, so. Oh well. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I appreciate every single one of you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.